George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Well, it is Black History Month, and we've got a sister who made history. And for some reason, we have not been giving this sister her flowers. So it's time to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the first African-American female police officer in the history of the city of Syracuse, better known as Cassandra Jones Ingram. Now, I know her as Officer Friendly, but we'll get to that in just a moment. But you've been retired for 23 years. Take me back to when you first decided that you wanted to be a Syracuse police officer.
Okay, back in 1979, I believe it was, I was just walking downtown, my brother and I, and we ran across Sergeant Edge, who was a sergeant at the time.
Yeah.
He was in the recruitment trailer. And we saw him. We said, "Hey, how you doing?" Because we already knew him. So we were saying hi. So he said, "Well, why don't you two come on in here and fill out these papers, fill out the paperwork to become police officers, to take the police exam." And we said, "Oh, okay, it won't hurt, So we went in, we did the paperwork, and we did take the exam. I passed, my brother didn't. And so now we have 2 years on the list once you take the exam. So I'm like, okay, I'm thinking this is going to happen like right away, because I actually did need a job, a full-time job, because I was presently, at that time, I was working as a cosmetologist, working in a hair salon. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I need to find something else to do, because I was always trying to find something more. So at this time, I tried to, I got on the police list, and a year went by and I still hadn't heard anything. So what I did was I called Chief Edge. Well, it was Chief Edge when I retired. Mm-hmm. Before he passed, he was Chief Edge. So I called him on the phone and I said, "Okay, it's been a year. Anything going on? You got anything for me?" So he said, "I'll get back to you." So he did. And when he got back to me, it wasn't the police. I wasn't being hired as a police officer, but I was going to be hired as a community service officer, which was considered a special police, where you had uniform, you had, the whole gear. Actually, community service officers now don't carry guns, but in my day, I mm-hmm. carried a gun, I had a billy stick, I had a uniform. The only difference in my uniform was that there was a yellow stripe down the side, and pay was less. So I still went around and handled stuff, but I just wasn't a police officer by title.
And so when did you decide? But so it wasn't like you had this great dream. You just walking downtown and decide, "Oh, I'll just do that."
Exactly. I never desired to be a police officer. It was never one of the things like, "Oh, when I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer." I never thought about being a police officer. All I thought about police officers was they were there in the community to help people and to take care of his situations, and when you call them, because we really never had growing up. I lived in Pioneer, I grew up in Pioneer Homes. I started out on McBride Street, 931. I remember the address really well. 931 South McBride, and we lived there till I was 8 years old, because back in that time, the children had to sleep in the same room until they reached a certain age. So then we moved to Tyler Court when I turned 8. But I never, really saw the police. So it was never really a desire to be a police officer. But what happened was I was in need of a job at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was explained that, you work 20 years and you can retire. I didn't really hear all of that. I just needed a job. So once I was a community service officer, I did that for 10 months. And after 10 months, I became a community service officer in October of 1980. And then 10 months later, I became a police officer. So that's how I got started. But again, it was never my intention to become a police officer. I was in need of a job.
Were there other Black community service officers at the time? Women?
I'm trying to think. I don't believe so. I never even thought about that, but I don't believe that there were any other community police officers, Black women, no.
And so, what did it feel like to finally become a police officer, or because you were able to, I want to say, lead up to it? I mean, it was still a big deal being the first. What was that like for you at the time?
Well, when they told me that I would be the first, it didn't really rise me. I mean, it's like, okay, all right, because I didn't take the job to become the first. I took the job because I needed a job.
Right,
It just
straight
so
up.
happened, it just so happened that it fell on my lot to become the first. Now there were other women, black women who had tried the job, tried to get on the job, but once they do the background check, some things don't, pan out, and so they don't take the job. So I guess after my background check, I guess there was nothing to kind of hinder me from doing it. So I became the first.
And so, what was that like for you once you got on the force?
When I first got there, it was great. The novelty wore off eventually, but when I first got there, they put me on a walking beat so that I could be seen in the community. And the community was well pleased at the fact that we finally had a black female officer, because it had been 30 years prior that they had a black officer, male officer, and then 30 years later, here I come. So they were really pleased about seeing me there. And the fact that, a lot of them knew me, being that I grew up in the city of Syracuse. So it started out really well. I do recall, though, when working the desk, I think as a community service officer, I don't think I had made officer yet, that there was a gentleman who came to the front desk and he asked to speak to an officer. I said, so how can I help you? He said, I want to speak to a male white officer. I said, oh, okay. So then I went to the sergeant that was sitting, in the office, and I said, there's a gentleman outside of the desk and he wants to talk to an officer, but he wants to talk to a male white officer. So he said, okay. So he came to the desk and he said, this officer is well able to help you with whatever it is that you need, and if there's anything that she can't help you with, then I can help you. So he said, you either deal with her, or you leave. Well, he left. He didn't want to deal with me. So he didn't, whatever his situation was, it wasn't taken care of by me. So he left the building.
And so, did you feel the support of? Did you overwhelmingly, as you continue to do your job, did you feel completely supported in your new role?
I felt supported in some areas, but I still could sense in my insides that there were officers, male officers, who did not appreciate the fact that I was there. I did road patrol, so you had to ride with officers. So I know that because they're used to what they do. When I say used to what they do, I rode with one officer who was a smoker,
Mm-hmm.
and he did, just because I was in the car, he was, my FTO, my field training officer. He didn't stop smoking. He let the window down a little bit, but it still didn't really help the situation. He didn't say, will this bother you? He didn't ask anything. It's like, you're a rookie, you're gonna ride, but if you don't like it, too bad. So I didn't ride with him long. So eventually they kind of, because they rotated you around different hours, different field training officers. So and I think probably he is the one that complained that I was with him. He didn't want me to be one of his trainees. So I think he's the one that said, I don't want to do this, because a lot of the officers, if they had been there any length of time, they did not want to be FTOs for rookies.
Did you find that being a black woman or being a woman was harder?
I think both.
Mm.
I don't, for me, I didn't feel where there was a separation of the two. And I say that because when I was, after I had been there a year, because the novelty wore off after a year. When I had been there a year, I was pregnant with my first child, and they didn't know what to do with me. I
Mm.
was I was like, it was like, because most women, either they already had children or they didn't have them on the job. It wasn't. I mean, there were women there, but I do remember that there was one woman whose husband was also an officer. She left the job after she had her first child, because she wanted to be a mother. She wanted to stay home and take care of her children. So she didn't come back to the job, even though she was there for a length of time. And so I think they figured, well, we hired this young lady, and here she is now. She's pregnant. What are we going to do with her? So what ended up happening is that we had like a 911 center in the basement of the public safety building. So that's where I worked through two of my children.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I had a child, the first two children, I worked in this communications is what we called it, where we got the 911 calls. And we didn't even have uniforms then. So this is how unprepared the city was. We didn't have uniforms for maternity. And what I did was I made my uniform. I made a jumper, and I made a pants jumper, and I made a dress. And I wore the police shirt underneath those outfits, and I just rotated them for my whole 9 months. And I wore my badge on the dress I made, or the jumper I made. So I was still representing. However, they didn't know what to do with me, and they didn't say you can't wear. They didn't say what to wear because they didn't have a uniform for me. So I made my own uniform for the police for while I was pregnant. And
So would you say
it was. Go ahead.
would you say it was welcoming for you? And you said the novelty wore off after a year. How was it welcoming throughout your time there?
I got along with a lot of officers. What happened was after I had the first child, it's like the community forgot about me because they didn't see me. So some of them didn't realize I was still in existence. They said, "Oh, we didn't even know you were still here. We thought you were gone." It's like they saw me and then they didn't. So, that was kind of different, because it's like I didn't think I was gone that long for them to miss me to the point where they didn't really even know I still existed. So it's like I had to start all over again. But I was still doing road patrol after that. I mean, it took me a while to get back out on the road, but when I got back out there, then they remembered who I was. Some people.
Did you ever, once you became, police officer and you were doing the job, what was the most challenging aspect for you?
I would say probably dealing with not the streets. The streets was I loved working the streets. I loved doing the officer friendly. I loved doing the DARE program. I loved what I was doing. For me, it was the administration. It's like sometimes how they treated me. I was saying earlier today, when I was talking to a group of people, that I can remember one sergeant who I had done a call. I was on a call, and when I finished the call, he came up behind me. I had sent the kids on their way. It was a noise call, and they had gone upstairs, on their way upstairs walking. He comes to the call, and he makes them come back downstairs. And I'm like, well, why is he doing that? So he starts yelling and telling them take off he had a spike bracelet, and I think it was a spike belt. I know it was something on the belt. And so he made them take those things off. And he said, these could be used as weapons. I'm like, but they're making noise. They're not causing a problem. They're not hurting anybody. They were going upstairs, that. So I'm like, I didn't understand why he was making them come back down and then taking their gear. So then later on, he calls me in the office, and this sergeant begins to yell at me. I mean, yell. And I'm like, wow, is this really happening? And he yells at me to tell me, what were you doing? And I explained to him that, the call was over. The kids were going upstairs. They weren't causing a problem. So he said, well, they could have been used as weapons, these things. So it's like, I just listened. And he was just yelling. And then he said, are you having problems at home? I said, no. I was calm as a cucumber. But he was ranting and raving. I think the whole building could hear him yelling at me. And so when he finished, I went back outside. I sat in my car for a little while to kind of cool off and to regrip. And then I went on back to work. But I never understood why he did what he did. But after that incident, I don't know, somebody else higher ups talked to him, but I never had another incident with this gentleman.
You talked about becoming, so I remember you as officer friendly.
Right.
And how did that happen?
Well, Sergeant Edge, who had then become a chief, he was working in communications, which was the area where, things were done with the community. And so he said that, I want you to apply for this position, of officer friendly. I'd love for you to work officer friendly. So he hired me as officer friendly, And I did that for a number of years. And that was before I worked Hilltop that I became officer friendly. I did work Hilltop for a while, which was a challenging, pleasant place. Though when I mentioned it, people are like, Hilltop? It's like, yeah, that was one of my favorite places to work before I became officer friendly.
And officer friendly, meaning you were more like an ambassador. You would do talks and presentations
Yes.
in the community, similar to what might be called the Community Service Bureau now. Is that
Yes,
fair to
that's what
say?
it is.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, so
And,
I did, as officer friendly, we went into school, it was 3 officer friendlies at the time I became officer friendly. We would go into schools 3 times a year. We'd talk to the kids about stranger danger, about bicycle safety, and what else did we talk to them about? I can't remember the third was, and about good touch, bad touch. So we would work with Rape Crisis Center to teach that.
and you also obviously talked about doing the drug awareness resistance education, their
Yes,
program.
yes. Yes, we did that with 6th graders in a number of schools. So when I first started, I think I had like 13 schools, public and parochial schools to attend to do programs. And then after we lost one of our, not lost him, but he retired, one of our officer friends retired, I then took on like 18 schools. So we would go in and talk to the kids. And the drug abuse resistance education was to teach the children to stay away from drugs and the dangers of drugs. And peer pressure also was a part of that, not to be pressured to do the drugs or anything that, would cause harm to you, yourself, you or other people, or to cause you to do something that would take you to jail. So that's pretty much what that program was about.
So you did your 20 years, and then you now do something else. What do you do now?
Well, after I left the police department, I did work at Syracuse Housing for about 5 years, working in the security department, where I would go, check on the tenants, to make sure they were all right, check their doors and make sure that they were fine. And then I ended up working in one of the apartment buildings, where I would have people, sign people into the building for a few years. I did that. And then after finishing with that, I was doing a business. I was doing in Getty Fragrance and Designs, where I made perfumes, I make body butters. I was making jewelry, but not, I ended up leaving making jewelry, and I collected vintage jewelry, so that I would, I would buy and resell vintage jewelry that people couldn't find, that maybe their grandparents wore or something like that, So I went into vintage wear.
And that's what you're doing now?
That's what I do now, part-time. And I'm like a full-time caregiver for my mom also right now, who has dementia. So I'm there with her mainly during the day hours. And my brother is there in the evening hours, but she right now she can still stay alone, but we're there with her because to get her fed and to get, make sure she has some company, so that's what we do right now for her.
Well,
91.
How old is she?
91.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Sandy, we're so glad that you stopped by to give us a little history of the history that you made in the Qs. Do you feel like you're like a celebrity or anything?
No, not really.
Well, we don't want people to forget that you made history as the first female police officer, Black woman, in the history of the city of Syracuse. And many others have come behind you. And so
Yes.
many others have come behind you. Many of whom I know. So some of whom, I shouldn't say many, some of whom I know. Some of whom I know. And well, listen, love and support, obviously, to your family. That's the most important thing. And we wanted Syracuse to remember who you are. And you blazed the trail for many others to follow. Cassandra Jones Ingram, I know her as officer friendly, but she's the first African-American female police officer in the history of the city of Syracuse. Thank you so much for being on the program. Anything you want to say to young women and men, boys, particular, anyone who's aspiring to be a police officer?
Just care for the community, care for the job that you're doing, uh, be considerate of the people, and have a heart to do what it is that you have to do as a police officer. Got to have a heart. If you don't have heart, you won't make it, I tell you.
And you, in terms of police community relations, you think where are we with that in your opinion?
I think we need to have more of color in the community of police officers. And I think that because we're dealing with a lot of issues. So I think that we need to see people like us in the community as officers, working with us. We have a few, but we need so many more. And I know that there's a fear to become an officer, but if you have a clean record, if you have no issues with the police, then I would suggest that, those who are interested, please take on the job. If you want to see change, you gotta make the change. And that means you have to take on the position to do that.
All right. Words to the wise. Cassandra Jones Ingram joining us, history maker here on Inspiration for the Nation. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.